Welcome. Welcome to another episode of The Impact of AI. Each week we discuss and dive real deep into how AI impacts us both personally and professionally. This episode is supported by WLDA, Women Leaders in Data and Artificial Intelligence. This week our guest today is Samta Kapoor. She has a lot of history within AI, data, strategy, and consulting, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm excited to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Oh yeah. I thought about, doing this huge introduction of all the things that are just really awesome about you, but then I felt that was just going to take up too much time and it'd be so much more interesting just to hear it from you. So I do look at LinkedIn and I noticed that early on in your career, you had engineering and telecommunications and marketing. And I know now that you are this really leading thought leadership around data and strategy and AI and consulting. So I'd love to hear the journey.
Yeah, no, sure. So you mean I don't have 30 minutes to just talk about my journey? No, I'm kidding. I'll keep it brief, but like you rightly pointed out, Melissa, by education, I'm an engineer. So, did electronics and telecommunication engineering. So build a ton of circuits. While doing that, I was like, oh, these are great. I love doing it, but is anyone ever going to buy these? Or am I going to be this person who's just going to be building things and leaving the rest to God, right?
Mm-hmm.
So decided I needed to get a little more business education. So that's how I moved to the US actually, and went to Duke University to get my master's in engineering management. And while at Duke, I was very keen on getting international exposure. So I started working and did an internship in Chile and Argentina. So got exposure. And while I was there, I realized I did not speak any Spanish. I needed a full-time offer from the company I was interning with. So decided to make sure that I was focusing on market research and generating the leads that were needed for a credit card processing platform. Did that, got a full-time offer, came back to the States and started doing a lot of work in data and AI, but it wasn't that cool back then. I'm not even going to lie, because when people asked me what I was doing, it was like, yeah, I'm defining a product to see how data flows, for the treasury management piece, and also doing testing around some applications to make sure they're working. So it wasn't super cool back then, but started doing that, did a lot of strategy, client relationship, business development. And while there were like a few decisions that came. So did a lot of client relationship, strategy, business development. And when I was doing that, there were a few decisions that came rolling down and they just didn't make a lot of sense to me. So I was like, maybe I need to learn more about business. And that is where I went back part-time to business school and got the marketing angle as well as the strategy. So I majored in strategy and minored in marketing, and did it part-time at Kellogg, and then graduated and started working with Accenture, where I am now, and lead our data and AI West, which is oil and gas. So I am now working with Accenture and leading our data and AI business for utilities, oil and gas, and mining. And my expertise lies within AI strategy. So I sit within the intersection of business and technology, just because my background kind of lends me to be able to do a good job there.
No, that's really great, because it sounds like everything that you've done has woven into where you are today. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
And utilities, oil and gas, those are very, very data heavy. Yeah.
Extremely data heavy.
One of the things that you had mentioned was that you not only have this data and strategy focus in your job professionally, but there's also things that you're doing outside in your personal area that is some volunteering, I believe, that you're doing.
Yeah. So one of the passion projects that I have, Melissa, is to solve for world hunger. Ideally should pause for 10 seconds and let people laugh at it. But I honestly believe that data and AI can solve for it, right? There was, before COVID hit, there was this whole plan that I had laid out, and who would have predicted a pandemic at that time, but to kind of at least run a pilot between San Francisco and Mumbai and use airlines, because it's literally a logistics and an optimization problem, right? So data can definitely help in that. So, for example, right, airlines have this corporate social responsibility, the CSR that they have to solve for. So how can we partner with them to have like at least 2 areas to begin with, run a pilot and see how it goes and then expand from there. So that's one of the projects. And in my personal life, other than, focusing on data and AI and, doing this, I'm also a mom to a 5-year-old. Do a lot of parent-teacher association activities and like run behind her when I have the time.
Yeah, I have 2 12-year-olds. They're twins. But I have to, and they're at that stage where I don't have to run as much. They're coming to me, but I completely remember when they were that young. Yes.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
With a manual, that doesn't happen.
So I want to focus more on the data and the really the value creation that you're doing with the data. We hear a lot that data's out there, and I'm a huge advocate. Data is the heart of the organization, and it's always been that way. But as you mentioned, it's never been really slick and shiny, or it's never really been the focus until just recently. And we all talk about when you have data, you're making better informed decisions. You're allowing the company to realize that they've got the information and it can help them not only make the right decisions at the right times, but more specifically at a point in time when that decision will give them the most impact. But yet, as you've illustrated, there's so much more behind the scenes before the data is ready to make that decision. So one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what are some of the real world examples where data is being used in the organizations? And it sounds like your focus is utilities, oil and gas, but what are some of the real world examples of how data is being used to create that value?
Yeah, and having grown up across industries, right, it's been very interesting to me personally to see the impact that data is having today across the board, irrespective of what industry one sits in, right? So the value that's created, and like you pointed out, Melissa, there's a lot of behind the scenes that happens today, but we are over the big data explosion. So now it's about like getting this insights from the data and the ability, because of the infrastructure that we have today, the ability to get real-time insights is huge. Now, getting into the real world examples, right? I think if we think across industries, HR is a very common function that we all can associate with and know, right? If you think about the whole hiring life cycle, right? Data can impact through and through, from hiring, like from knowing who the right candidates are, when the resumes are submitted, to be able to identify what skills they have, how have they performed in the past. Like there's no area where data cannot help, right? That's just one angle. When I was thinking about like real world examples, and I was talking to someone just the other day, and I was like, now it almost, data's to a point where we have to think where data cannot be used. Because as an organization, if that's not the question that you're asking yourself, you're definitely missing the boat. Because gone are the days of like hypothesis driven, or intuition driven analysis. Like there's data everywhere to solve for almost everything, right? Companies, like, how do you launch, when do you launch a new product? What should that product mean? Doing the customer journey analytics, understanding your customers better, being able to retain your customers, all of these things, data can be an enabler to solve for, right? And if you look at your balance sheet, like there's all these financial things, like your cash positions, how much are you paying your vendors? Like, what is it that you can get discounts on? Like data can give you insights into all of those. And in my humble opinion, I think data should be on the balance sheet and it should be treated as an asset. Like companies need to get to a point where data is truly the backbone of decision making across the board.
You mentioned something a minute ago that I want to ask you about. You talked about hypothesis, and I remember 10 years ago, as an interview, I was being asked, are you comfortable making a decisions with not all of the data there? And more specifically, this company that I was interviewing with was having a challenge where people were waiting until all of the data was there before they would make a decision, and by that time the opportunity was gone. There was this I'm frozen because I don't have all the data. So I want to revisit that. And you mentioned the 80-20 rule. So are we assuming that now that maybe more this is broader with everybody, that really decisions, we can't really decide with 100% of the data because there is so much more data out there? So are you implying with that conversation that, yeah, we really are making decisions, but we're still only making them with maybe 80% of the data, simply because we're now, what was it, petabytes of data?
Oh yeah.
Like, how can you
Oh,
wait
yeah.
for all the data if you've got petabytes of data,
Zeta
right?
peta. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So here's my take on it, Melissa.
Mhm.
I think we have a lot of data, like you rightly pointed out, right? Now it's almost to a point where it's analysis paralysis, right?
Yes.
So I believe that organizations should have a strategy where you identify the 20% of data that help you make 80% of high value decisions. So what are those data elements? Because there's so much that goes in the back end, right? You have to govern your data. You have to have good quality data for you to truly get the insights that are valuable, because it's literally garbage in, garbage out. If your data is not governed properly, if the quality is not great, any insights that you get are not going to be great. Now, can you really govern all the data that you have? Sure. Is all the data important? Absolutely. But do you need different standards or tiers in order to know how to look at data and which data is most important? Absolutely. I am yet to come across any industry or any organization that has so many resources to take care of every single element that they own today, right? And to add to the complexity, now we have synthetic data, we have third-party data, right? There's so much data that you can bring into being to get the insights that you need. But the important thing is to identify that 20% to give you the most value, and then break it down to say, how am I going to use it, right? So actually, I take it back. The business value should define how you're going to use that data. So everything should be linked to that.
So let's dive one more layer on the definition of value. If I'm an organization and I hear what you're saying, my immediate question is, how do I define what that value is for me and my organization and my sector and my industry?
Yeah, great question. Maybe I'll give you an example so that our listeners can hone in on the details here. So say I am in the retail business. My business priority today are two things. One is great customer experience, and two is dynamic pricing, right? So when I have these high-level objectives that are laid out by the C-suite, which have been acknowledged and kind of put out there to say, these are the two key things that I need to accomplish, right? And I'm in the retail business. Once I know that, then I can get into details to say, okay, in order to accomplish dynamic pricing, what are the data elements that I need, right? In order to understand the customer journey, what are the data elements that I need? Are there any overlaps in that data? If there are, absolutely, right? Like that becomes a proper set that you need to include in your critical data elements, or that 20% of data that we've been talking about, right? What are the other elements that I need beyond the overlap that's going to help me get to accomplish these two business objectives, is how I would go ahead and break it down and then understand that data that is truly very valuable for me to accomplish the business value and the objectives that have been laid out.
I think that was perfect. That was great. If I step back, because you are the expertise today with the larger data strategy vision, but if I step back in those examples, my next thought to that underlying data strategy is not where am I getting the data, but where's that data being housed? And I've talked to a lot of folks who are building internal, somebody said they were actually using AWS, somebody said we're using Microsoft Azure, somebody said we're building a proprietary lakehouse. Like, I think what I'm hearing as kind of a pattern is that there has to be, as part of that data strategy, some layer of architecture where all of that's being housed together. Are you finding that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that I'm seeing a lot is
Mm-hmm.
duplication of data. So the same, and I'll give you an example from utilities. The same data for asset is housed in SAP. It's also housed in GIS. So now when you're building the architecture, when you're trying to analyze that asset data, which data do you really go for, right? That's where the governance, the master data management becomes very important as you build the architecture. Because architecture definitely wanted to be scalable. You definitely wanted to house the data. That's the most important. You definitely wanted to be very, very AI ML driven, i.e. like the components that you get in the cloud, right? You want all of that in there, but I think a step before the architecture also, and before you think about housing that data, is how do you really get the good quality data in there? And how do you talk to the business that's using that data and how they're using that data to build that master data management or a golden record of data, and bring it into the architecture that you've laid out?
So everything that you've talked about, there's a lot going on. And there's a lot going on. And I'm sure there's all these other, layers that we haven't even touched on. As part of that creating value for the organization, are you finding that it's absolutely necessary that the enterprise needs to have, and I'm going to use the word chief data officer, but somebody who really owns that data? Because I'm not seeing that yet. I'm not seeing a lot of buy-in yet for that. I see it with maybe the top, Fortune 100, but I'm not seeing that yet with a lot of the other companies.
In my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and it's purely my opinion, I think that is absolutely mandatory. And I'm not saying that it has to come in with that title, or it has
Mm-hmm.
to come in with like someone called as a chief data officer or anything of that sort. But I do believe that you need, if in an organization or if as a company you've committed to being a data-driven company,
Mm-hmm.
I hope every company has by now, but if you've committed to being that, you need someone whose day job is to look at your data, make sure your data is truly the quality that needs to be produced. The other thing to this is also the fact that I would take it one step further, and I think it should be a chief data and analytics officer, because
Okay.
everything has to be tied to business value. And I think that's where the analytics piece comes into being. And that's how your data angle. I feel like it is very important to have that spectrum, or the full stack, as I like to call it, to make sure that you're getting maximum value and you're using data as an asset to be a needle mover for your balance sheets, honestly.
So if we continue down the process, so we've got the data, we understand that it's being driven by our corporate goals and strategy. We understand the infrastructure, the governance. There's somebody there who needs to own the day job. As we're moving this data through the pipeline, I recognize that there needs to be this feedback loop that somehow allows us to, and not metrics necessarily, but somehow allows us to help the leadership recognize that what we're doing truly is adding value. But oftentimes, I'm going to use the word KPIs, there's oftentimes metrics that need to be driven from that. So what are you seeing today that allows us, in this role to come back and say, no, we are really creating value. Here's how I can show you.
What I have seen work best is definitely starting with having like a proof of concept or a minimum viable product, if I can say, which is MVP, right? I feel like as long as, whether it's the chief data officer or whether it's a team that's focusing on data and AI, artificial intelligence or advanced analytics, however we want to bucket that, and you're able to show value by taking a high impact business area, doing a small proof of concept, giving people the time to digest what they're seeing and seeing how it directly impacts either their metrics or the broader corporate metrics, has been I'm not going to say easier. There's always, scaling AI is a big problem, right? So, but it's always been the people perspective and they're able to touch and feel things that data is telling them and use that in their day-to-day life to then kind of move towards scaling versus trying to go a big bang approach, unless of course the company is, very data driven already and there's like different industries sit across the spectrum. So it just depends on where we're starting from, but with the starting point in mind, doing like the POC or the MVP and then looking at scaling is usually a great way to make sure that you are able to move the organization along, show the value, target the metrics and move further.
Okay. So Samta, I know that, as we talk about data, one of the underlying, really a lot of topics that have been going on for the last couple of years is around the bias in collecting the data. We've had some conversations on these podcasts about some of the challenges when you're doing mass third-party data collection and how to ensure minimizing bias, responsible AI, transparency in the individuals that are not only collecting it, but also how they're testing it and putting those models together. I know this is also a passion of yours. I'd like to learn a little bit more about what you're doing in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad you laid it out the way you did, Melissa, because I feel like responsible AI is a big thing right now. And like every organization that's embarking on their data and AI journey should definitely be very conscious of how they're using it and how they're making sure that there are no biases in the algorithms. I don't know if you read this, but a few years back, there was a company that was using AI to do hiring and was unconsciously leaving people out of a certain background, right? So all these things, and even a school that was trying to use computer vision to identify, kids that would come in with a gun or cause shooting, had built the algorithm in such a way that the output was actually kids that were being bullied, right?
Oh.
People who were like, it wasn't kids who were like prone to bring in a gun, but it was just built the other way around because of the biases that were in there. So knowingly or unknowingly, a lot of these algorithms can impact individuals and human beings, which is why one of the areas that I'm super passionate about is responsible AI. The thing that I believe, of course, there's a lot around like the data collection, the data usage, etc. But I also believe that there's a big people component to this, and which is when inclusive and diverse teams become very important. So when you're algorithm, how do you have diverse perspectives on the table so that you're not making mistakes that happened in the past or we have seen create biases? And also, and when I say like diversity and inclusion, I don't only mean by gender. I mean like by ethnicity, by disability, by all the stretch that we can all come together and make sure that the data that we are using, the data that's going to give us the real insights.
You want to elaborate a little bit more on maybe some examples that, if folks haven't thought about that yet, what are maybe some key takeaways that we could give them?
Sure. There are a few takeaways, right? I'll talk about the ones data and AI related, and then I can just personally as well. Some of us are probably in this field. Some of us are trying to get in this field. So where data and AI is concerned, definitely responsible AI that we just touched upon, I believe is a very, very big thing. The other thing is always treating data as an asset and tying it to business value is extremely critical. The third thing that we didn't touch upon so much, but I feel is very critical, is driving a data-driven culture. The processes, the data, the architecture, everything is great, but if the culture doesn't exist, it is really hard to succeed. The other angle that I do want to kind of talk about is just personal stuff, right? I think like having the curiosity, especially if you're interested in data and AI, because the field changes so rapidly. So being curious, just wanting to learn more and understand what are the different downfalls, right? Because this is such an upcoming field, but wanting to be very conscious about what are things that could not probably work if the algorithms are not set up correctly, are the other are the two things that I think are like big takeaways for me.
As we come close to wrapping up, I'd like to ask for your final thoughts on any kind of leave behind or advice, because we've covered a lot of topics, both professionally and personally. If someone was listening to this and they've got that curiosity that you just mentioned, what are some ways that they can get more involved? Because one of the things that we probably don't want to recommend is everybody needs to go out and get a degree, because that's not necessary anymore. So what are some other options?
So great question. Some of the options and some of the things that I've been doing as well is looking at conferences. There are many conferences that are free of charge that one can attend, and there are really good speakers there that one could look into if you want to get into the field, or if you're into the field and you want to enhance. The other piece is a lot of organizations themselves offer a lot of courses that one could sign up for and learn. No organization is paying me to say this, but there are there's Coursera, there are other avenues that one can get into. The other thing that I found very exciting and interesting is the industry that you're really interested in and keen on has a lot of conferences which are industry focused, but they, like everyone everywhere, they talk about data as well. So another good avenue to learn. The last thing that I would say is that reading a lot on the journals, the magazines, what's happening, and listening to Melissa's AI podcast, which is every time I listen to it is so informative, and you have the best speakers. I think are just inroads into making sure that we are staying up to date and understanding where the industry is going.
Well, one of the things you didn't mention was associations, because I know you're part of a couple associations. So what are these associations that you're connected with, and what are you getting from them?
Yeah, and my bias is towards my passion, which is inclusion and diversity. So the organizations that I work closely with are Women Leaders in Data and AI, and also Women in Data. And the exciting part about these is not only being able to kind of define trends together with my peers, and Melissa, you're a big part of it, but also by being able to have that network that you can bank on, right? Like that you can grow with, and you can just have conversations and same kind of challenges, throw it out and find solutions to, has been very, very helpful.
I think I'm going to emphasize the very last comment you made, which was networking. I'm a huge advocate in that. As I mentor other individuals in IBM and outside of IBM, the number one thing I tell them is when you meet somebody, go connect with them on LinkedIn. Because as you've just mentioned, it's not just about the networking is the underlying infrastructure that allows everybody to share the information and learn from each other. So I want to emphasize the networking. Yes, absolutely.
100%.
Well, our time has come to an end. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today.
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks for having me.
This was great.
Fun.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.